So today I am excited to have Dan Merchant, the writer and director of Going Home, which is a new PureFlix series. Dan, welcome to the Andrew Brunet Show.
Andrew, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So to start off the interview, I want to ask you a question here. Where did your love for directing and writing really develop?
It's interesting. One of the telltale signs is on the wall behind me, which are images of the Fab Four. And when I was a little kid, I would listen to Beatles music, and I found it so creative and so inspirational, and I loved the way that their creative expression was a way for those guys to communicate with the world. And I went, oh, I want to express myself to the world somehow too. And eventually, I became the kid who would type up comedy skits and bring the scripts to summer camp so that we would have quality material, mind you, ready for Friday night's talent show. So I don't know. I guess I was just inspired to make people laugh and to connect with people. And it was just one of the ways that I set about trying to find my way in the world.
So was it something you knew as a child that you would be a director and a writer?
It took shape later on, but music did not come to me naturally, so I had to find other. Unlike my brothers and my actually even my kids are better at music than I am, particularly my youngest Nate, who's a musician. So I eventually got into writing, thinking, hey, I could do that, or I would think of jokes or think of things that would crack me up and write them down, and went, okay, maybe this is how I do this. So eventually became that, and then through high school doing comedy skits and short films with friends, and then into college, doing things like that, and then I just sort of found my way around it and found that I picked it up pretty quickly, and I was good at visualizing, and you spend a lot of time in your head as a kid, and you get good at the things that you need to be good at as a writer director.
So, as I mentioned before, you're the writer and director of a new PureFlix series called Going Home. Share with us a little bit about what really inspired you to write the series.
I think and just a point of clarification too, it's TV is really a team sport. So we had a writer's room with Matt Michelatos and my wife, Kara Merchant, were joined me in the writer's room. And I worked on a TV show called Z Nation for the Sci-Fi Channel and recruited a couple of directors from that show, Jared Briley and Jason McKee, who also direct episodes on the show. But I'm what they call the showrunner, or the executive producer, who's in charge of all the creative. And so I kind of supervise all of it. And I did a lot of the writing and I did a lot of the directing. But I just want to clarify, it's a team sport, and I couldn't have done it without the crew and the cast and all that. But the idea, I think it bubbled up out of my psyche or divine inspiration, or however you want to term that, during the pandemic. And my father had been diagnosed with cancer. So I think there was a lot of evaluating our mortality went on during the COVID lockdown in 2020. And this idea started to percolate, and I started to think about, and certainly we were seeing, nurses and first responders on the news daily. And I started thinking about my own experiences with hospice nurses, with my grandparents or my parents, and just kind of got fixated on them a little bit by how comfortable they were with death and how important their role was and how positive my interactions had been in these limited ways. And, I started to realize, I suppose, that I'm not all that comfortable with death and we don't seem to talk about it very much. And wow, these hospice nurses are really interesting characters, and it's an unexplored territory. And I just thought there might be a show. But to be honest, sometimes the way it works with great creative ideas, 1 minute it's not in my head, and then the next minute it is. And when that inspiration hits you, then you go, oh, wow, is that a show already? That seems like a good show. And then it starts to, you start to flesh it out. Then you have to do the craft, you have to do the work. But that inspiration part is really fun because you don't really know where it does come from.
So was it through your parents and grandparents being in hospice that really came back to your memory when forming the idea for the show?
Yes, it did. Great question, Andrew. Thank you. Yes. What I remembered specifically about one of the hospice nurses with my grandmother was, how did she always know the right thing to say and do? That was a thing that stuck with me, and going, yeah, that's kind of weird. And she had this calming presence, but also a very strong presence. And I just found that as I reflected back on it, because I would have been in my 20s, I suppose, when we had these encounters, and been many years older than that now, going, yeah, what was that? And so as we got into the program, we had the opportunity to interview and research with Hospice of Spokane. We shot the show in Spokane, Washington, and I was able to ask these kinds of questions of the hospice nurses. And what I learned coming out of that was that being present is a thing that they're very intentional about. And what they meant by that was, really, as you see demonstrated in the show with Cynthia Geary's character Charlie, is leave yourself at the door. You're here to serve these people, and your job is to be present. And when you're not worried about how you look to them, you're not worried about what you're going to say next, you're not worried about yourself, you're just observing in this room, in this very intimate and tender and difficult time for people. Well, when you're present and that's all you're focused on, it's not as hard. That's the hard part. It's not as hard to see what needs to be said when you are present like that. And that was sort of how they articulated a little bit to me, one of the superpowers of the hospice nurse.
And one of the main things that Christians like to point out these days is entertaining angels unaware.
No.
and when we first started hearing about all the COVID, it was just like nurses became frontline heroes and angels that we have never really paid attention to. So how do you hope this series sheds a light on nurses today?
Well, yeah, no, again, well put. I think you're exactly right. I hope, because the show is what we endeavored to do is a thoughtful show. It's a tender show. It's a beautiful show. It's not about a lot of the kind of adrenalized emergency room kind of TV action with high stakes like you're used to seeing. It's really a little bit of a detective story in a way. And so you get to see the thought process of the nurses, and you get to see really how incisive and thoughtful they are in terms of trying to figure out what each character needs. So, for example, in the pilot episode starring former NFL player Vernon Davis and William Allen Young, who plays his father, Harry, our nurse Charlie has to suss out kind of who needs what from them. And it's not always just the person, who's in the bed ailing and about to pass away, who needs something from her, the loved ones, the friends, the family members as well. So I think what you get to see in Going Home that maybe you haven't seen in other nurse dramas is really their intuitiveness, their thoughtfulness, and their determination to really help fill the needs, as the hospice needs. Hospice workers say it's the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. And so that's a very kind of deep and complex and beautiful thing to try and dramatize. That's very different than give me 20 cc's of morphine stat. It's like, which is exciting. And, that's the adrenaline filled ER kind of thing. And we need that, but those shows have already been made. So we're trying to tell a different kind of story on Going Home.
So give us a brief overview of Going Home and who some of the actors are featured in the series.
Sure. So Going Home is the story of a team of hospice nurses who work at a place called Sunset House, which is set in it's a fictional setup, but it's set in Spokane, Washington, and it stars Cynthia Geary as Charlie Copeland, who's kind of the head nurse, and she's this veteran nurse. And for Charlie, being a hospice nurse is literally a calling from God. She's a person of faith, and we understand that this kind of motivates her. And she's she's a little quirky in kind of how she does her job, and she's got her little ticks, and she's got a very high standard. But She feels very clear that she's doing this thing that she's supposed to be doing. She has this purpose and takes great comfort in the purpose of it. And one of the elements of the show that's kind of fun is at the end of every episode, she kind of recaps her day sitting on the patio talking to God, who is her closest friend. And one of the things, if you watch close, you notice that kind of her tone of voice and her manner of speech is pretty different when she's talking to God than it is during the show, where she's a bit serious and really focused on things and can be deeply tender and very warm. But I really wanted to portray her friendship and relationship with God is very tangible. It's as if her friend was sitting with her having tea. And sometimes, I mean, it's a little bit of an inside joke at my house because I'm a bit more, Lord, well, it's like David screaming the Psalms or something instead of having the conversation, And so that's what I love about Charlie's authenticity. And then we see her walk the talk. We see her show love and compassion and kindness for others. Cozy Zulsdorf, who you might know from Dolphin's Tale and Disney Channel shows, plays Janie, who is the rookie. She's the excitable, young, full of life hospice nurse who's just got this job and is trying to figure out how to do it, how to be like Charlie, who's highly decorated in her field, and she's just got this joy for life that she can't contain. But she's also trying to figure out, well, how do I fit the room? How do I do what's here? And we really, over the course of the 6 episodes, get to see Janie grow and mature, and it's really it's beautiful to see the friendship develop between Charlie and Janie over the course of the first season. And it goes from a mentor protege relationship towards the end of the season. You really get to see a genuine friendship emerge there, which is really touching. Another great actor on the show is Charisma Carpenter, who makes a brief appearance in the first episode. And she's really kind of the fly in the ointment for the season 1 here. She's an old friend. She plays Catherine, who's an old friend from college of Charlie's, somebody that Charlie hasn't had much interaction with for a long time. And she's unfortunately contracted cancer, and her treatments have ended, and she's going to be dying. And there's a wonderful shift that's required as the season goes on. And we kind of tease at it in episode 1, where you go, okay, this is an issue that Charlie doesn't handle very well, and it's complicated to her. And she's trying to figure out why God would bring her back into her life at this point, because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Don't mess me up. So we've probably had that conversation with God before. So that's one of the things that I think is again really refreshing and honest and direct about the show. Is it's a messy, tender human show, and we kind of lean into that stuff. But Charisma Carpenter is who you might know from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, big hit TV shows in the 90s and 2000s, and she plays Catherine, who's a dear friend, and we get to see Charlie soften and transform and try and figure out what is she supposed to do with this friend of hers who has now entered end of life care. So there's a lot to it.
That sounds like a fun series that everybody should watch. And the main setting of the series takes place in a hospice care unit. And when most folks talk about hospice care, their minds immediately go to a depressing setting. But what I have found through watching the series is it's more encouraging. So what are your hopes that, let me say it this way, in what ways do you hope Going Home sheds a light on not only hospice care, but the afterlife in general?
Well, it's an interesting question. The show is very hopeful. It is very encouraging. And one of the things that encourages, not unlike the Bible, it says, hey, we're not promised tomorrow, so what are you going to do with today? It really is encouraging about living life to the fullest, of being on point with what your purpose is, coming correct with your relationships. There's a lot of layers here that are really relatable to somebody who isn't in the deathbed. And one of the things that we demonstrate in the show this is the thing that we sort of learned from the hospice nurses, is that death isn't the opposite of life, it's part of life. It's the last chapter of life. So it's actually, to me, that was kind of profound, as simple as that sounds. It's like, okay, now I have to look at this differently. And so I think one of the reasons we struggle with conversations about death is because it drags behind it all these other questions. Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Am I doing it right? Why does it hurt so bad? Why am I, why won't those people talk to me? Why I'm never talking to them? All the business of life that gets messy with people, these questions about mortality drag all those questions that we don't like to talk about forward. And so I think what Going Home does is really gently and lovingly show you the transformative power of forgiveness, the transformative power of an apology, the consideration of looking back over your life. We might make different decisions today, you and I, if we were looking at it from a deathbed perspective, if you will. Well, let's have that perspective today, and maybe we can restore this relationship and get 20 more good years out of it before we go, or whatever. So I think that's one of the things that, in a really sneaky way, the show's very, very hopeful. It can be very cathartic. It is sad when loved ones die, and they, as Charlie says in the show, and they leave a hole in our life. That's true. That happens. But again, as people of faith, don't we believe they're going somewhere better? Right. I mean, isn't that what we say we believe? And so I think part of the reason that's hard for people to accept is maybe our business isn't completed with folks. And with both of my parents, I had challenging relationships with both of them at times. But the benefit, this is going to sound weird, but cancer is a slow killer, and it's awful, but it's slow. So we had the benefit of those months and those times to have conversations that, like, I'd put off for a decade or two, but we were given that time. And there's a weird blessing in there if you take advantage of this time to try and restore things. And I have to tell you that helped with my grief enormously. The fact that things ended well with both of my parents, who had they gone in a car wreck or an accident or some other kind of thing earlier, I'd be left holding this baggage that I was blessed to be able to work through with each of them before they went. And that's what's available to us if we choose to take it.
So to the one who's facing a loved one today that may be entering hospice care or getting ready for eternity, what advice can you give them that may help them get through this tough time?
Well, kind of like I just described, I feel like, say the things that need to be said, or say the things that you feel in you. There's a line in the show where Harry, who plays Vernon Davis, is Vernon Davis's dad, Tyler's character in the show. And he asks Charlie that exact same question, like, what should I say? And then she says to him, well, why don't you start with those words that are running laps in your head? And by that, it's like, the conversation you need to have, or the thing you need to say, or the thing you want to be sure your loved one has. And it's like, it's no magic bullet, but you'll feel better, and you're creating a space where potentially there's a healing or some baggage can be put down if you're willing to enter that space. And that's something the hospice nurses are very attuned to understanding and trying to help facilitate where appropriate. But again, they're there to tend to the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. And there's three separate kind of categories there. And, we play, as loved ones, we play the role potentially in the emotional and maybe even in the spiritual needs. So that's a thing that you might be surprised. And look, once they're gone, you've lost your chance to have that conversation too. And I guess the other thing too, to go into that prayerfully and without expectation. just because this person hurt you or you hurt them, whatever the situation might be. And you want to make sure that they know that you love them and you forgive them, and they might not feel like they need to be forgiven by you, whatever, I don't know. But I still feel like if again, prayerfully, that's something, if there's something on your heart that you need to say, you'll feel better for having said it. And it may matter and help their transition too.
So in your career, you've had several opportunities, I'm sure, to meet those in the entertainment field, one of which I hear you have a very interesting story about, and that would be meeting your musical hero, Roger Daltrey of The Who. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. I was telling that story to somebody the other day. Well, what was really fun for me was, so I did a television program on VH1's cable channel back when they did all kind of music stuff. And I was I created the show with a couple of high school buddies and somebody that I'd actually, Joe on the show, Joe and I had actually even seen The Who together like in 1982 or something. So it was really fun to get to have Roger Daltrey come and do this TV show. The anecdote I was thinking about was, it was about 2 a.m. and we were shooting something in a theater, and I was sitting out in the theater seats with Roger Daltrey, and a PA with a guitar, a prop guy goes by, and Roger goes, "Hey, let me borrow that guitar." So it's this little out of tune acoustic guitar that he grabs, and he's kind of plunking around with it. And I just had a slightly out of body experience. So sitting next to this guy that I slept in line at the Kingdom, to see the Clash and the Who in 1982, up on the stage, and then here he is sitting next to me working on my show, and that was a really fun little experience. So anyway, he's plucking around playing old Creedence Clearwater Revival songs or something, and I made some comment to him about a kind of a rare Who song, just some album track on one of their not bigger albums that I really liked, a song called "Dreaming from the Waist." And I go, "It's a good song," and he's like, "What?" And I go, "That." And then he starts playing it, and I just thought, wow, that's it just felt like for a second that I could measure the progress from being a teenager cranking old Who records or seeing him at the show to sitting and working with him. And so it was like a little weird transcendent moment where it's like, okay, I'm getting my chance to share my ideas to the world and doing it with somebody who helped inspire me. So it was just one of those little weird moments where you kind of go, okay, I guess we're getting our way down the road, and this is pretty fun.
So with that being said, what about some others that you may have met that have made an impact on your life in the entertainment industry?
Well, one guy that I, again, bonding over music is an interesting thing, but another guy who played on that Strange Frequency show is a guy named John Taylor, who plays bass guitar for Duran Duran, as we've been, that's 20 years ago that we did that show together, but we remained friends. And interestingly, my youngest son Nate grew up to become a musician, and just released an album this year that John Taylor co-produced with him. It's called Merchant, and Beautiful Meltdown is the name of the album. So that was another one of those, oh wow, I guess I felt like a grown-up when my friend, who is this, Rock Hall of Fame star, ends up working with my kid, takes a shine to Nate's music and wants to partner with him and come together with him on that. So that was another kind of a neat thing about how, like, from a distance, I was inspired as a kid or a teenager by these guys. And then later you get to meet them, and they're nice people, and they're hardworking people, and thoughtful and creative artists, and very kind and things like that. So it sort of puts it in proper perspective that we're all fellow image bearers, and it's interesting to hang. They're definitely kind of, I like to think of being in the same tribe as those guys who figured out also how to try and express ideas to the world. And so, like with Going Home, I'm really proud to have been able to work with, my friend Matt and my wife Kara to kind of create a show and, be able to bring it to life with my friend Rich Cowan, who's produced 50 movies. But to be able to come together and, like those guys that I admired as a youngster and became friends with some of them, to be able to go, well, what what conversation might be helpful right now, and maybe a show about death that's about life, and it's an entertaining show, and you might cry. I mean, I think it's a three hanky show. You could tell me, but I feel like a show like Going Home, this might be a really good time in the culture to have the conversation and to think about it and learn how to react, and interact with each other in a way that includes the idea that death is part of life.
So, what are some other projects that you're working on? I hear there's one with one of my favorite stars, a Full House. I've been sitting here since I've been in quarantine watching a Full House marathon, matter of fact. And I hear that Joey of Full House is going to be on one of your projects.
Yeah, we've got another really great show, completely different kind of show. But in July, coming to PureFlix is a show called Live and Local. And we go behind the scenes of a radio station called K-Hug FM 109, and Joey, Dave Coulier, the Cooler, plays a DJ, morning DJ called Tommy, and Emily Pendergrast plays Tina. So they're Tommy and Tina in the morning on this mythical K-Hug radio station. So it's behind the scenes of a radio station, and some of the show is on the air, and then some of the show is behind the scenes, a little bit like The Office in that respect. And then one of the fun elements is we have guest stars that come on and be interviewed. So we have like Dallas Jenkins, the producer of The Chosen, as a guest, and John Cooper, who's the front man for the rock band Skillet. Great guy, hilarious guy. He's on. Colton Dixon, who did American Idol and is a terrific pop singer. Dustin Nickerson is a stand-up comic, among many others. So it's a funny, weird hybrid show. But I'll tell you what, Dave Coulier and Emily Pendergrast and Pat Cashman and Kendra and Cheryl, who are the kind of the full on the air team there, they're really funny, and it's a really great, refreshing. Just, you haven't seen a show like this in a while, I don't think. It's very live and local. July, PureFlix.
Well, Dan, I have had a great conversation with you. I have really enjoyed this. Tell our viewers how they can find out more about you or your projects or what's coming soon.
Yeah, so Live and Local in July. Going Home is on PureFlix now. The first 2 episodes are up. New ones on Thursday. So I think the next episode, directed by Jason McKee, starring Russell Hodgkinson as a guest star. He played Doc on Z Nation on the Sci-Fi Channel. So another old buddy of mine comes in for that one. So every Thursday through June are new episodes of Going Home. So check that out. You can go to PureFlix on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. I kind of stay out of all that stuff, but you can stay updated on the shows that way. And tell your friends about it. Just as you were saying before, I feel like with Going Home, if you watched it, you'd be surprised as to what it is. So I think that if somebody goes, oh, it's a show about death, or oh, it's a hospice nurse thing, oh, that sounds depressing. It's not. It's funny. It's human. It's warm. I think it's a beautiful show. And again, the performances by Cynthia Geary, as Charlie, and Cozy and Charisma Carpenter. I mean, there's some beautiful acting on this show, in my opinion. And I'm not just saying it because I directed it. I got to sit there in the edit room and watch it over and over. And I just actually watched, I'll be candid with you, Andrew. I watched the first episode again, after months of working on it, and hadn't seen it in a couple of months, and watched it when it debuted the other night. And I probably cried 5 times, and I knew what was going to happen. So I think if you're open to the ride, I think you find it a very beautiful and cathartic and entertaining show. It's just, it's not going to be what you think it is, but give Going Home a try.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the Andrew Brunet Show. I appreciate you. And hey, I hope to speak to you in July when the new series comes out.
I'll look forward to that. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.